"Hold my Bud Light," said Activision Blizzard, as they joined the ranks of Anheuser-Busch, Target, and Disney, plunging Call of Duty straight into the culture wars. In so doing, they run the risk of their customers abandoning them, which would cost them billions. So why did they do this? What could possibly be worth that risk? Well, by all accounts, a couple of their employees asked them to, and then they just had to do it. That may sound like a joke, but it isn't, and to see why, we will once again have to dive into the world of stakeholder capitalism, ESG, and most specifically the CEI scorecard, which we haven't explored until now. If you don't know what that or the preceding terms entail, then don't worry, this is the video for you, as we're about to go through it all and see how individual woke employees can hold entire corporations hostage. In this video then, we'll begin with what Activision Blizzard just did to Call of Duty, despite knowing full well what happened to Anheuser-Busch and Target. Then we'll explore how stakeholder capitalism and ESG is the driving force behind it all, or the carrot if you will. And finally, how the CEI scorecard functions as the stick, which assures compliance, even at the expense of customers and shareholder value. There has been past instances of controversy associated with the Call of Duty franchise, albeit of a different nature to now. Back in 2019, game journalists accused Call of Duty Modern Warfare of historical revisionism by shifting the blame for historical events in which the US partook onto Russia. In other words, the criticism was centered around the game being too pro-America, and this criticism was repeated the following year, only even harsher, over Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, the game that famously featured excerpts of the very real 1984 interview with KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov, in which he warned against subversion in Western democracies, most notably in the United States.
Understand what's going on around you. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself.
But that was then. Today, Call of Duty is facing a very different kind of backlash, this time not from game journalists, but from its very own customers. First, some context. As we have covered earlier, Bud Light, formerly the biggest beer brand in America and therefore the world, decided to Heinerscheid their brand with a double whammy, consisting of an interview with a VP whose ultimate goal for the brand was to change the world and appeal to a younger crowd. And to this end, a paid social media advertisement featuring a renowned LGBTQIAP+ influencer. While this was surely appreciated by activists everywhere, it did not sit well with Bud Light's actual and paying customers. Since then, the decline in sales has continued to increase from week to week, losing the shareholders of parent company Anheuser-Busch billions. We'll get back to Bud Light, as they'll factor into the story again later. Next to pull a Heinerscheid though were Target, whose Pride specials, again, were surely appreciated by activists everywhere, but they did not sit well with the majority of parents, who also happens to comprise the majority of Target's paying customers. Between dropping sales and the subsequent fall in share price, Target shareholders have also lost double-digit billions on this endeavor. But pride is celebrated beyond Target, even in public institutions where children fare, increasingly prompting clashes between activists and parents. Responding to a tweet from an activist who bemoaned the actions of parents, Nicholas Nickmerks Kolchev of the esports team FaZe Clan then proceeded to suggest that maybe there wouldn't be any issue if the activists merely refrained from targeting the very youngest with their activism. But in suggesting this, Nickmerks must have touched on some quiet part that is not to be said out loud or something, because it certainly hit a nerve. In being a known esporter, Nickmercs has previously worked with Activision Blizzard on a Nickmercs bundle for Call of Duty, but very shortly after this tweet, the Nickmercs bundle was removed. This then is the cause for the current round of backlash against Call of Duty and Activision Blizzard, this time from their own customers, and it is over how quickly they cancelled a bundle and on how shaky a foundation. They provided an explanation on the official Call of Duty Twitter account though, saying, "Due to recent events, we have removed the Nickmercs Operator bundle from the Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone store. We are focused on celebrating Pride with our employees and our community." But arguably, they just alienated their community, running the risk of Heinerscheiding themselves, and judging from the wording, they did so because, in all likelihood, a very limited number of employees went crying to management. Why on earth would management risk becoming the next Target or Bud Light by bending over backwards for their employees like that? Surely, as long as the employees get paid and aren't asked to do anything not in their contract, they don't get a vote in how the company should conduct its business, least of all when potentially billions are on the line. Well, welcome to the paradigm of stakeholder capitalism, which is the first step in understanding what is going on with these companies and why they are so beholden to their own employees. We have explored stakeholder capitalism at length before. Click on the link in the upper corner or video description for the full details. But in order to set the stage for what comes next and why all these companies have gone all out activist, let's do a brief recap of the most important highlights and on how stakeholder capitalism differs from the previous model of shareholder capitalism, where companies grew and created shareholder value by giving the customers what they wanted. Any university course will tell you that what is decreed to be problematic about shareholder capitalism is that when the company is only interested in maximizing profits, there may be negative externalities outside of the company, pollution being the go-to example. The current year answer to this, then, is no longer the outdated concept of corporate social responsibility, but stakeholder capitalism, a model that is designed to better serve not just the company, but society at large. Under this model, the purpose of the company is to increase value not just for shareholders, but for all stakeholders. Who then are these stakeholders? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's literally everyone. The shareholders are included among the stakeholders, but they're just one of many and are not necessarily deserving of any special privilege. Other stakeholders include the employees, especially employees that belong to some protected group. That's why Disney's management allowed themselves to be held hostage by their own employees who demanded the company use its financial muscle to influence Florida legislation over the Parental Rights in Education bill, which is what directly led to the Reedy Creek Development District being dissolved. Whenever you hear some huge corporation talk about their responsibility to their employees, this is why. Their employees are not just paycheck recipients, but stakeholders. That then is the theoretical, bordering on ideological reason why all these companies are under the thumb of their employees, especially if those employees belong to some protected group. Then they carry more weight than regular shareholders. In this particular case, if some employee at Activision Blizzard who also happens to belong to some protected group found Nickmercs' tweet to be harmful and complained to management about it, then management would have no real choice but to do what they just did, even at the risk of becoming the next Target or Bud Light. But of course, there is more to it. Companies don't go Heinerscheid themselves just because of a theoretical framework, which is all stakeholder capitalism on its own really is. But there is also a carrot and a stick, which are present in the practical application of stakeholder capitalism, namely ESG. We have also covered ESG at length before, see our earlier video for a more extensive exploration. To very briefly recap though, for huge corporations in particular, their access to the credit they need to not just stay in business, but to further expand their operations and grow as a company is now linked to their ESG score. If they don't comply with the social and environmental requirements needed to maintain a sufficiently high score on a number of metrics, their credit line is on the line, as are their business opportunities with companies that have their score in order. Case in point, here's what Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, told European energy companies, just in case they were entertaining the wrong think of not abiding with the environmental requirements.
If you do not have a lens towards decarbonization, you're not going to win one euro of business.
So there's the carrot and the stick. The carrot is that they get access to and keep their credit lines if they're nice and compliant, and the stick is that they will lose that credit line and business opportunities if they don't. However, it is rumored that there is another stick as well, and this particular stick is the one that, allegedly, helps motivate companies like Disney, Anheuser-Busch, Target, and now Activision Blizzard to go all in on activist causes, especially if their employees demand it. Under S in ESG, social, we find DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, which is further divided into a number of score subcategories depending on industry. But one of the main ones is the Corporate Equality Index, or CEI for short. This is a score that a number of companies seem to be of the opinion that it is vital to keep as high as possible, even at the expense of customers and shareholders. And the arbiters of how high any company rates is the HRC.
Okay, the natural bodies of administration, which are traditionally either elected by people at large or appointed by elected leaders of society, are being actively substituted by artificial bodies. The bodies of people, groups of people, whom nobody elected. Never. As a matter of fact, most of the people don't like them at all, and yet they exist.
The HRC, or the Human Rights Campaign, has nothing to do with human rights in the sense that most understand the term. What this well-funded organization does is monitor compliance with the Corporate Equality Index, which is the ESG benchmarking tool on corporate policies, practices, and benefits pertaining to LGBTQIAP+ employees. If such employees are not given equal treatment, or, as some might argue, sufficiently preferential treatment, the CEI score under the overall ESG umbrella suffers. This is where that other rumored stick allegedly shows up. Officially, nothing happens if the score wavers, yet there are persistent rumors, almost bordering on a belief in certain corporate head offices that if this score isn't up to par, activist organizations may first grumble in social media. Then they may even call for boycotts. But that's just the beginning, a warning, if you will. If things get really heated, the A's may show up, scare away your customers, and hold some, what's the term, fiery but mostly peaceful protests on company premises. Again, these are just rumors. There is no official document stating this, so do treat with a grain of salt. But remember I said earlier that I would get back to Bud Light? Well, this is where. As we said in our second video on Bud Light, the HRC were most displeased with Anheuser-Busch for failing to stand by their chosen social media influencer, and so they downgraded their CEI score. Funnily enough, right around that time, prominent advocacy organizations started calling out for Bud Light boycotts. In our previous video, I had some thoughts on what that ESG downgrade would mean. But it does mean that Anheuser-Busch are now on notice and expected to do better. they will be told in no uncertain terms that they will have to get their ESG score back up, or else. But, of course, doing that while their customers are fleeing to the point that analysts downgraded Anheuser-Busch stock might prove a challenge. And now, this Human Rights Commission, as well as other ESG score awarding bodies, will be expecting them to pull out all the stops for Pride Month. So it will be interesting to see how they will manage this. Lo and behold, we now know they ended up paying millions to various Pride events in penance. Many assumed that they were doubling down of their own free will, but as we have seen, there may have been more to it. Going back to the very beginning, for a company like Activision Blizzard, being beholden to the same ESG rules as Anheuser-Busch, and especially in light of Microsoft on the cusp of acquiring them, what this all means is that if a couple of their employees start demanding action be taken against people like Nickmercs, well then it just might be easier to run the risk of becoming the next Bud Light than the certainty of running afoul with the HRC. That, then, is the reality for businesses operating under stakeholder capitalism, which fundamentally is anti-consumer. If you liked this video and want more on this, then smash that like, hit subscribe if you haven't done so already, and help share this video, which otherwise is almost certain to be suppressed. Shout out to someone who did just that, namely James Lindsay. He graciously gave us considerable props in his recent video on ESG. While we covered it from an entertainment perspective, he did so from a political and societal perspective. If you are interested in that, you do not want to miss out on that video, so check it out, link is in the description. For now though, let me know your thoughts on this in the comments.